So, as you can see here from the board, we're going to start our lecture series here on World War II. And I kind of like to break World War II up into different sections because it's a little lengthy, it's a little long. So, we're going to break it up into kind of the years prior to World War II, or we'll talk about what's going on in countries, primarily Germany, in the wars before the war actually begins. And then we're going to talk about the war in Europe, the war against Germany and Italy. And then we'll talk about the war in the Pacific against Japan. And I like to do that because sometimes if you talk about the war altogether, students kind of get confused. Well, was that in Europe? Was that in the Pacific? So we'll break that up. And then finally, our last topic will be the home front, or what's going on in America during the war. So let's start our first topic off today then, the years prior to World War II. And let's talk a little bit about what Germany was like in the years before the war. So we'll talk about Germany here in the 1930s. And one of the things to remember about Germany, like every other country during this time, they're going through a depression. Now this is the same depression that we were going through in America. We called it the Great Depression. We just finished our study on that. But in Germany and in many other countries, it's much worse even than it is in America. There's more unemployment, there's more businesses failing, there's more homelessness. It's just a lot worse. Now remember what we just went through in our study of the Depression, what people had to experience. Now imagine that being even worse, and you sort of get the picture. Now, one of the things that's really hitting Germany hard is they're suffering from inflation. Now, if you don't know what the word inflation means, that means a rise in prices. That simply means that things are costing more. Bread costs more, housing costs more, gas costs more. You can identify with that. We've experienced a little bit of that here lately. And remember a couple of years ago when gas was in the $4 and rumored even to be maybe going into the $5 range, how that impacted your guys' life, how you couldn't maybe do some of the things that you were used to doing. And that's what was happening in Germany. But in Germany, it was off-the-charts inflation, what they call superinflation, where things just exploded in terms of cost. And I'll give you an example. Bread. There's numerous stories of things costing more, but one in particular that I remember is the cost of bread. During the worst part of the Depression in Germany, one loaf of bread cost about an entire month's salary. So you can imagine if you're trying to feed a family in Germany, how that impacts you. And in fact, the money became so worthless in Germany, you'll see a picture of this in your book, that the kids actually made building blocks out of it. They made blocks stacking a bunch of the money together, and it became just something to play with. Sometimes they would decorate their rooms with it, or playhouses, because the money wasn't really worth the paper it was printed on. It just was worthless. So Germany was suffering through this depression and this superinflation, and a lot of this had to deal with those reparation payments that they had to pay as a result of the Treaty of Versailles that ended World War I. You can remember maybe that reparations are payments that the losers of a war have to pay to the winners for the cost. And Germany got saddled with lots of these after World War I, and this was causing a lot of their economic problems. And again, remember, this depression that we studied in America is hitting everyone as well, and Germany even more so. So this is the time where Hitler starts to gain popularity or rise to power. And a lot of the reason is because Hitler gives these speeches and he says, I'm going to give you bread, and I'm going to give you work, and I'm going to restore Germany's glory. And people like that at the time, okay? It's very similar to the same things that FDR was saying to the American people during our Depression. And when people are down in the dumps, people that can inspire them, people that are good public speakers, can motivate people. And that's what Hitler was. We'll talk a little bit more about Hitler on our next slide. But Hitler comes along and he promises people, hey, I'm going to restore Germany. Okay, we're going to fix things. okay? And we're going to make sure that you can feed your family and have a decent living and be proud to be a German. And he says that, I know the cause of all these problems and we're going to fix them. Again, very similar to things like FDR was saying. And because people were desperate, Hitler gains a little bit more popularity than perhaps he would otherwise. Because some of the other things he said were pretty far-fetched or pretty radical, but because he's wrapping them up in the message of, I'm going to fix things, I'm going to give you jobs and bread and those kinds of things, people start to listen to him. Now the Nazis are Hitler's political party, so that's what you can write down. A Nazi was someone who supported Hitler, just like today our political parties are the Republicans or the Democrats. The Nazis is a short for the National German Social Workers' Party. And this was just the name they gave to it because it was catchy, and you know that their symbol was the swastika, perhaps. And this is their political party, and people that supported Hitler were Nazis. One of the things that's kind of interesting about Hitler here is when things are bad, Hitler says that I have the solution, but the Nazis weren't getting a lot of votes yet. They still were not getting put into office. They weren't voting in the elections for a lot of the Nazi candidates. And so what Hitler decided to do was to try to take control of Germany by force. And that's what the word coup means here. C-O-U-P means to take control by force. And this is not an unheard of thing. It happens quite a bit in countries, and it happens in countries today. If there's a lot of fighting in a country and there's no real strong leader, sometimes a leader will emerge and try to overthrow the current government with guns and just by military might. And that's what Hitler tried to do. This is called the Beer Hall Putsch, and that's the German word for it, for a coup. Basically what he did is he gave a big speech in a beer hall, and these are found all over Germany, but basically a bar, saloon, whatever you want to say. He gave a big speech, and his plan was he was going to rally people, and people would come and grab their guns and march through the streets, and as he marched, more and more people would join his cause. And eventually they would march through Germany all the way to the capital of Berlin and just take control of the government through the massive army that he had amassed. Now what happens in reality is when Hitler does this, he doesn't get the support that he expects. And in fact, he is arrested and put in jail. Ironically, however, this actually helps Hitler more than anything else because his trial is a sensation in the country. And when he goes on trial, he makes these very impassioned speeches, and he sort of emerges from this trial as a celebrity. He gains fame and notoriety because of this trial for trying to overthrow the government. Now, normally you would think if that happens, people would be pretty upset and angry, but so many people are listening to this trial on the radio, reading about it in the papers, and they read his speeches, and they're really moved by that. And so this really makes Hitler famous. And even though he's convicted and he has to go to jail for a short time, this makes Hitler famous and well-known in Germany, and it's going to start him on the rise. Now, it's when he's in jail, then, that he writes his famous book called Mein Kampf, which is My Struggle in Germany, in German. And in this book is filled with his ideas or plans for Germany. And basically, he's saying, if I ran things, this is what I would do, this is how I would fix things, and so on and so forth. And this becomes a very popular book, a national bestseller. Lots of people reading it and getting a hold of his ideas. Now, I myself I've tried to read it, but it's filled with a lot of rants, and it's very difficult to follow. Gives you a little insight into Hitler's mind a little bit. But he writes this book in prison, and it also helps him become very famous. And something else to mention about this book, it's in this book that you will see something called anti-Semitism. Now, a Semite is someone that is Jewish, or believes in the Jewish faith, and so anti means against. So definition for this would simply be prejudice against Jews, or dislike of Jews, hatred of Jews, this sort of thing. And in Mein Kampf, this is where you see a lot of this from Hitler. And Hitler, this is where you see him start to blame the Jews. He blames the Jews for the Treaty of Versailles, which has caused